Don't salute me, Colonel. If they're dragging me out of retirement, it's already too late. Commander Dorian Vex didn't slow his stride. The station's docking corridor stretched ahead like a throat carved from synthetic basalt, its walls vibrating from structural recalibration cycles. Each step sent a soft tremor through his knees, not from age, but from the weight of memory walking back into uniform. Colonel Strath moved to keep pace, boots echoing against reinforced flooring. The Directorate asked for a full recall briefing. They want the original architect of the Avanti protocols. They want a scapegoat, Vex muttered, brushing his palm against the scanner panel. A door hissed open with a pressure equalization that tickled the inner ear, drawing a wince. The stale chill of interior control air rushed out, filtered clean but carrying the mechanical tang of recycled lithium-ion purification. The command deck remained unchanged. Tiered heads-up displays ringed the ceiling like a halo of information. No alerts, no scrolls, just the orbit of Earth's strategic web outlined in blue. Two operatives rose from their consoles, instinctively straightening their spines. Vex didn't acknowledge them. His gaze settled on the central projector, a fused array of thermal lensing and stellar trajectory analytics. He squinted. Where's Corinth? Strath keyed a search. The model zoomed, reframing on the Sagittarius Gate corridor. Corinth Minor shimmered in the outer field, highlighted, tagged, and logged as Node 9A, dormant. Dormant doesn't mean destroyed, Strath offered. It does when there's no telemetry, no radiation, no error margin. Vex leaned forward, eyeing the trajectory logs. When a planet stops breathing, there's always a reason. 3 years ago, he'd signed that world into the Accord's scientific custody, an Earth-administered dig site buried under strata older than Dominion flight itself. A joint effort, a trust exercise. And now, nothing. You're here to give us context, Strath said quietly. The Avanti claimed nothing happened. No incident, no traffic. No knowledge. Vex exhaled through his teeth. The same Avanti that asked for fusion loop stabilization algorithms and offered gravity corridor access in return? His voice darkened. They always wanted position. We gave them permanence. The words sparked the room into quiet. Strath hesitated, then tapped a sequence into the display. The holographic starfield dimmed, giving way to a recorded transmission. Avanti diplomatic channel, timestamp 2 hours after Earth's Article 4.2 request. Rejected in full beam, the Dominion response flickered to life, amorphous, shimmering, framed in rings of bioneural data patterns. The translation overlay activated. No vessels were dispatched, no Earthlink sites have been approached. Accord violations remain unfounded. And then, cut, not ended. Severed. Strath turned. You were right about one thing. They didn't just sever communications, they erased evidence of the breach. Vex stared at the empty loop where a formal sign-off should have followed. In Avanti culture, exit phrases were ceremonial, always accompanied by a trailing waveform. Here, there was nothing. Not even the waveform's decay. The Avanti don't lie through omission, Vex said. They lie through integration. They weave falsehood into consensus. Make the lie useful to everyone listening. He stepped back. The hum of power relays beneath the deck boards felt more pronounced now, like the exhalation of a living system, waiting to be told who was still in control. Strath studied him. Then tell me, Commander, why would they destroy the site? Why now? Vex turned toward the viewport. Beyond the glass, Earth's orbital ring floated like a chain around a forgotten god, still unshaken, ringed in light from the sun's angular scatter. He didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, it was to the reflection of his own face in the glass. We gave them partial keysets, non-lethal, non-central, a gesture of trust. The Terra integrators on those border worlds, they weren't meant to control, just to support. Atmospheric modeling, core temperature harmonics, oceanic tide sink, safe, passive. He paused. Unless someone wanted to test what Earth doesn't talk about anymore. Strath folded his arms. That's speculation. That's mathematics with motive. Vex replied, we seeded devices across 37 joint territories. The only thing we ever held back were full-spectrum constants. And you think they tried to reverse engineer them? I think they tried to overwrite them. Vex's voice lowered. But they didn't understand that those values weren't standalone. They were part of a greater logic web, one bound to Earth's infrastructure. They tampered with one key and unbalanced the whole lock. Strath straightened. Then they broke the accord. Vex's expression didn't shift. They broke the accord the moment they thought they could erase us from their side of the corridor. A low alert pinged from the side console. A comms officer turned, her brow creased. Command, we've got telemetry requesting sync from Node 9B. Partial data link, fragmented but readable. Vex was already striding to her console before the officer finished. The stream was corrupted, skipping frames. Audio channels clipped, but buried in the packet headers were timestamps. Nested and aligned with Evandi orbital maneuvering events. Strath leaned closer. They didn't just abandon 9A. They extracted something. Accelerated out system. The screen pulsed once, then froze. The final frame displayed a trailing vector of Dominion ships leaving the sector. Vex stared. His eyes didn't blink. They didn't want to be caught. They wanted to finish something without us knowing it ever began. A silence settled over the deck, thick with unease. Strath spoke carefully. This puts us in breach territory. What's the next diplomatic step? Vex didn't move. Diplomacy? He stepped away from the console and back toward the star map. Diplomacy is the art of believing what both sides fear won't happen. He keyed the projector. A new overlay shimmered across the starfield. Classified node designations, Earth-supplied infrastructure markers, Evandi proximity zones. He zoomed on Corinth Minor, its orbit now darkened. This is the step where you stop pretending they made a mistake. This is where you remember who installed the stabilizers. The deck light dimmed briefly, power draw syncing with a new process in the background. It passed in a blink. Most officers wouldn't notice. Vex did. He turned his head slightly, voice low and heavy. Begin internal clearance review. Mark all former joint venture corridors for advisory threat assessment. And notify Archive Command I'm assuming post-Surex status under Article Black 7. Strath tensed. You're invoking cold retainer status? Vex didn't answer. His fingers moved across the interface, opening an encrypted channel, only accessible through biological key imprint. In the voice command, confirm identity, Vex, Dorian, authorization code, initium sigil. The interface accepted. The screen displayed one word, dormant, and beneath it a question. Reactivate? Vex pressed his thumb to the terminal. Yeah, run that scan again. There's no way a full biosphere leaves no trace. Senior Recon Operator Malice didn't glance up from his command seat as the recovery feed flickered across the forward display panels. The shuttle's narrow observation canopy curved around him, framing Corinth Minor in sterile indifference. From orbit, the planet resembled a laboratory marble. Matte gray ridges, no visible cloud bands, crust lines warped and smeared like scorched clay. It was lifeless in the way deserts dream of becoming. Across from him, systems engineer Roca blinked furiously at the readout streaming across the heads-up grid. Seismic records show stable tectonic layering just 3 cycles ago. Now the crust's density reads 20% below equilibrium, and the upper mantle is, he hesitated, non-existent. Malice's fingers tightened around his chair support rail. You mean displaced? I mean removed. There's a vacuum pocket where the mantle should be. The drone telemetry came in next. 4 recovery crawlers, 0 obstruction, 0 debris. The dig site that once hosted Earth's most delicate interstellar archaeology unit now stretched like a cauterized wound. No scaffolding, no shelters, not even the scar of an excavation pit. A flattened shelf of vitrified ground remained, warped by thermal override and surrounded by mineral dust without crystalline structure. Every isotope had been stripped. In the observation bay, the faint static from atmospheric buffers pressed against the hull like the breath of something enormous that had long stopped exhaling. Malice stood. Transmit full scan logs to the DCA vault. Flag this as non-natural extinction, Category 9. In orbit, silence lingered like suspicion. Corinth wasn't simply attacked, it had been dismantled. Layer by layer. Intellectually. Clinically. As though someone had erased its purpose and then excised the evidence. Back on Earth's orbital command tier, the inner chambers of strategic oversight remained sealed. Dorian Vex stood with both palms flat against the projection console, watching as the raw imaging feeds arrived. The rotating feed from Node 9A unfolded slowly. Reconstructed planetary mesh, atmosphere analysis grids, loss vectors, and orbital departure trajectories. Each line carried data extracted in real time, and every data point told a deeper story than the Yavanti ever admitted. A new voice crackled across the communication uplink, its accent layered through automated translation. Diplomatic, formal, and barely rehearsed. As per Dominion records, no extractive vessels were dispatched to Sector Corinth. We confirm absence of conflict, deployment, or procedural notice. Treaty Article 4.2 holds. We await your clarification. It was the same message. Identical in tone and cadence. The third iteration Vex had watched that day. He didn't blink. The room's lighting dimmed to reflect priority flagging. Colonel Strath stepped forward, his jaw tense. They're not just denying involvement. They're recycling the same transmission header. Sequence markers haven't changed. Vex remained still. His right hand moved toward the console's side rail and tapped the log feed twice. An overlay appeared, exposing transmission architecture. Packet structure, encoding slope, node recursion. All consistent. Too consistent. Artificially so. They scrubbed their response generator, he said, voice colder than before. Hard-coded reply and embedded it in loopback protocol. No AI intervention, no contextual parsing. They wanted 0 variation, 0 footprint. Strat's brow furrowed. To avoid a trail, to guarantee consensus, Vex exhaled. This wasn't just an attack. It was a rehearsal. The observation windows trembled slightly as the orbital station completed a realignment pass. Outside, Earth's upper thermosphere caught the sun's refracted hue, amber bleeding into rust against the planet's curve. Vex turned from the display. There's no point escalating. Strath narrowed his eyes. You're suggesting we let this stand? I'm suggesting escalation implies doubt. There's none left. Vex's tone didn't rise. The Directorate doesn't need a war plan. It needs a memory. He approached the side terminal and keyed in a command string, his movements slow but deliberate. The input screen shimmered once, then narrowed into a secure authentication prompt. A biometric prism slid upward, scanning the ridges of his retina with a faint azure beam. Accessing dormant grid, Vex said under his breath. Level Theta, I'm requesting tether lock to project Maelstrom. Strath stiffened. That system was blacklisted after Cormody. Even referencing it requires military quorum. I don't need quorum, Vex replied. I authored the subroutines. He pressed his thumb into the contact cradle. The sensor reacted immediately, and a new message scrolled across the embedded readout in compact green text. Protocol Maelstrom. Status. Dormant. Activation requires legacy authority. Vex didn't smile. His jaw tightened as the next screen blinked awake. The sequence of Earth-supplied Terra integrators, deployed across non-core sectors, lit up on the tactical grid, each marked with the old Earth sigil in quiet, dormant blue. These weren't weapons, he said. They were calibration scaffolds, installed with mutual consent, designed to keep unstable worlds from collapse after corridor terraforming. Strath studied the map. We left ourselves in their soil. We gave them the option to live well. Vex paused, staring into the matrix of quiet markers across the stars. They returned it with an audit of our restraint. Silence returned. But this one wasn't strategic. It was contemplative. Something at the edge of awakening. Strath finally asked, "What happens if you trigger it?" "Nothing," Vex replied, stepping back. "At first." Across the room, the laser plasma display shimmered into update mode, initiating layered sync across inert Terra integrator sites. No commands were sent, no values changed, but monitoring was now active. Observational, waiting. He closed the terminal and stepped toward the reinforced corridor leading to Strategic Archive Sub-Tier 3. The hallway lights shifted automatically as he passed, adjusting to facial pattern recognition, granting entry without a word spoken. Strath followed. "What is Maelstrom really, Commander?" Vex paused at the threshold. Behind him, the sealed archive chamber glowed faintly with lightless memory, like an engine beneath the skin of history. "It's not a strike plan, it's a mirror." Strath didn't speak again. He watched as Vex disappeared inside, the door closing behind him with the weighted finality of something old, remembering why it was built. "You left the keys in their soil?" Director Amon Kuhl leaned forward across the operations tier, the edge of his sleeve brushing the laser plasma display, which was actively rendering sector overlays. "Tell me that's not what I'm hearing." Vex didn't react to the accusation. The chamber was too cold for rhetoric, and Kuhl's voice, for all its volume, hadn't changed in pitch since the first sentence. That told him everything. The man wasn't angry. He was scared. "We left support columns," Vex answered. "Not keys, not commands. Frameworks to stabilize what we were invited to co-develop. Without them, the fringe colonies would have collapsed into seasonal entropy. The Dominion was behind on sublayer climate modeling until we bridged the gap. The system's lights dimmed as archive access protocols confirmed their integrity sync. On the central table, a new layout appeared. 37 dots spiraled across Avanti-controlled sectors, each one nested within planetary subcrust indexes. The lines connecting them were thin, almost delicate. Kel gestured toward the map. "And these are live?" "They've always been live. They had to be." Vex turned his hand over, as if holding the weight of that reality physically. Terraforming algorithms don't run in isolation. Our calibrators constantly rebalance gravity tension, core pulsation rates, and thermal fluid dynamics. We didn't build weapons. We built equilibrium. "Equilibrium you can tip." Kuhl tapped a node. Varnath, one of the Dominion's hydrocentric border worlds, its climate stabilizer blinked with Earth's sigil, followed by a log. "Accepted without encryption. Krista Ek. That's the flaw," Vex said. "They refused our cipher shell, citing cooperative trust. Said transparency was diplomatic. What they meant was, they didn't want us controlling the kill swib." Kuhl exhaled sharply through his nose, then stepped back from the display. "Why not pull the support matrix, sever the tether?" "Because doing so would collapse their crust from the inside. These aren't backups, they're spinal columns. We didn't design them to be turned off." The chamber's wall consoles shifted visuals as passive satellite networks updated system metrics. Slow-moving orbital feeds tracked planetary core behavior across selected Dominion colonies. Nothing moved at visible speed. Everything happened below surface thresholds. Silent, unseen, irrefutable. Cool folded his arms. Why didn't we recall this tech when the Accord began to fracture? Vex walked toward the auxiliary terminal along the right-hand wall. As he moved, light receptors embedded in the floor adjusted per his step, illuminating the command path. Because we thought the trust would hold, and if it didn't, we assumed they'd target our ships, not their own atmospheric spine. He paused at the terminal. The interface flared to life, reading his biometrics instantly. A rotating Earth crest expanded into 3 security tiers, followed by an authorization prompt linked to archival authority. This isn't escalation, Vex said. It's observation. He keyed in the command phrase manually. Null sigil, initiate passive pattern watch. In that moment, across 13 dormant satellite rings and 24 planetary orbits, Earth's long, silent eyes blinked awake. Old tech, older than the Accord. Passive sensors buried under defunct maintenance tags, cold-stored protocols masked as environmental baselines. They didn't transmit. They listened. And now they listened differently. Are they armed? Cool asked, watching one node blink twice. They're incapable of harm, Vex replied. That's the design. But they see what we taught them to see. Core rhythm changes, phase shifts in local gravity, tidal misalignments, ecosystem anomalies, and then they log comparative variance. Cool tilted his head. Variance from what? Vex turned to face him. From the constants we taught the Dominion to believe were theirs. A new feed materialized above the primary display, presenting a side-by-side time-lapse from Evisar Theta, one of the deepest breathing ocean worlds in the Dominion's archive. The planet's aquatic cortex shimmered with delicate temperature layering. But now the layers stuttered, misaligned against previously stable ranges. Cool squinted. They're recalibrating their models. They're recalibrating with wrong numbers. Vex leaned in. They think they're correcting natural drift, but they're drawing from a poisoned ledger. Every adjustment multiplies the lie. Silence returned, not the absence of sound, but the suspension of assumption. Flashbacks flickered behind Vex's eyes. 3 years ago, a chamber not unlike this one. Evanti scientists seated beside human architects studying tidal bore samples from cross-gravity moonlets. A Evanti technician? Asavar had whispered across the table, her voice vibrating with excitement over shared resonance data. It hadn't felt like diplomacy then. It had felt like meaning. And now those same hands, wherever they were, would be watching their oceans shiver and wondering why the equations no longer closed. Cool stared at the display, tension rippling through his shoulders. This doesn't end a negotiation. It doesn't begin with one either, Vex said. We don't send fleets. We don't fire rounds. We hold up a mirror, one they help shape. Cool opened his mouth, then stopped. Then, quietly, what do you call this? Vex didn't look at him when he answered. Accountability. As if on cue, the overhead tracking grid expanded. 2 more worlds registered thermal drift. Subcrust lattices showed decoupled rhythm sinks, minor but accelerating. The satellites remained passive. The data streamed silently into Earth's vaults. Cool turned away. We're not touching their skies, Vex added almost to himself. We're just letting their own systems read a story they helped write. He stepped back from the terminal. The screen faded. Null sigil is active. And Earth's silence became the loudest message in the stars. Delta 9's wave harmonics just inverted. Thermal bands are climbing past melt thresholds. That planet's oceans are boiling through the cloud line. Evanti engineer Arshell's frilled appendages recoiled from the console as if burned. He stared at the data cascading down the surface of the heads-up interface, voice thinning under the weight of numbers no Dominion equation could explain. The command nexus aboard Hyvervassal Prime, a high-atmosphere regulatory hub above Delta 9, was designed to absorb tectonic vibration reports, not parse planetary death sentences. And yet, The readings poured in, undeniable, staggering. Gravity tension across the inner crust fractured its own model. Water density bloated beyond containment, separating from molecular thresholds designed to hold under atmospheric compression. Simulated ecosystems rejected their own feedback data. Delta 9 wasn't just overheating, it was unraveling. Core pulse misaligned, Basho whispered, voice trembling. Crust delta, slipping by entire degrees. The continent plates are floating out of phase. On the secondary platform, Overseer Tyrion lashed out, slamming his palm against the command rail. No weapon was fired. This isn't attack, it's decay. The heads-up display split in 4, highlighting thermal overlays from 3 other worlds: Jalvin's Cradle, Orson Vault, and the outer rings of Neshra Tor. All displayed identical anomalies: phased ocean tides, crust mantle separation, cloud systems reversing their spin. Energy outputs did not align with fusion decay. Biological registers failed to respond. Even the insects had stopped moving. A single technician's voice cracked from the lower tier. The terraforming AI loops have gone recursive. They're updating constants mid-sweep. Tyrion blinked. They're doing what? They're overriding themselves. Using Earth origin baseline constants. It's all legal protocol, recorded from decades of shared calibration code. They believe they're correcting deviation. Arshel leaned in, horror forming behind his ocular plates. Which constants? The technician didn't answer. He simply tapped the data stream with 2 fingers. It was a mirror of Earth's baseline cosmological set: thermal friction coefficients, lithosphere delay parameters, fluid mass constants. Vex's phantom signature embedded in the arithmetic. Tyrion's voice was low, guttural. We installed trust into the ground beneath our children. A distant tremor shook the orbital lattice. Everyone in the room turned. Halvin's Cradle, once a sanctuary world carved with floating monoliths and self-balancing waterfalls, had gone dark. Planetary rotation didn't stop. It staggered, like a heart skipping its own rhythm. A suborbital monitor began to flicker. Displacement velocity exceeded orbital shell tolerance. Air density collapsed into supercurrent vacuums. A shallow thrum passed through the alloy beneath their feet, not from an impact, but from millions of tons of atmosphere pulling away from crustal bonds like a dropped veil. Tyrion straightened, breath catching in his throat. This isn't decay. Arshel turned slowly. Then what is it? Tyrion stared at the display, now bleeding red line values into every quadrant. It's betrayal disguised as balance. They didn't bomb us. They rewrote the ledger we used to define what safe means. Inside the Dominion's capital nexus on Vayar, the Central Council chamber spiraled inwards, tiers of high-standing delegates murmuring across radiant biopanels. The planetary custodian AI and Lathari reported systemic contradictions in environmental baselines across 23 colonies. Agriculture algorithms refused to engage, citing data mismatch. Oceanic bulwarks expanded or retracted without synchronization. Thermal winds looped endlessly over terrain that no longer received sunrise. Delegate Vorin, eldest of the quadratic caste, addressed the high seat. This pattern cannot be natural. No equation resolves to this madness without design. Chancellor Iskaval tilted his cranial spine. We vetted the Earth calibration models. We confirmed their math. You confirmed the outputs, Vorain corrected, not the context. We never considered they might shift the meaning while we were asleep at the helm. An alert chimed. Ivanti's Deep Stellar Vault Array, a system that tracked particle decay across deep time signatures, began flagging variance logs from over 85% of connected colonies. Variance from what they believed was natural gravity. But Earth had authored the constants. And now the constants were converging around new values, ones invisible to the naked eye, but catastrophic to anything built upon them. At once, a ripple passed through Dominion scientific guilds. What if the environmental equilibrium they had trusted for years was not universal but gifted, tuned for compliance, and now weaponized through omission? And Lothar's voice, modulated and ancient, spoke into the core of every connected thought space. Stability offset exceeds corrective threshold. Suggest planetary evacuation protocols. Iskoval trembled. Evacuation to where? The stars we shaped together are folding in reverse. Meanwhile, Earth remained unseen. No ships approached, no threats circulated, no demands arrived. In their place came data, raw, uninterrupted observational logs. Earth's passive systems transmitted only gravitational models, comparative flux maps, projected survival thresholds. No sentence, only consequences. Inside the Terran orbital archives, Vex stood alone, arms crossed, watching the feed spool slowly across the upper-tier display grid. One world, then a second, then 5 more. Each line of collapse had a name beside it. A Dominion scientist, a counselor, a settler child. He remembered one, Asavar, from the early teams at Corinth. She had laughed over geologic phase sheets like they were poems. He didn't move. His reflection against the interface looked older now. Behind him, Commander Eric from Earth's Deep Response Unit entered quietly. They've entered Panic Cycle 6. Border transmissions are looping, emergency migration codes. They don't know where it's coming from. They don't know why it's happening, Vex corrected. Not yet. Eric hesitated. And us? We're watching, Vex said. Just like the protocols were designed to. Then he turned back toward the viewport. And Earth said nothing at all. Sector relay isn't malfunctioning. That's Earth tech. It never needed permission to arrive. Overseer Taveric narrowed his lens cluster at the data cascade flooding the comm-spire. The Eshran relay array, a solar-suspended ring of Dominion-linked transceivers, rotated slowly above the dead orbit of Calthus I, broadcasting emergency signals across the last open corridor. Its outer rims shimmered with residual particle drift from 100 failing systems, still trying to scream. But the anomaly wasn't noise, it was clarity. Centered directly above the relay's command axis floated a Terran probe. Small, unadorned, and unapologetic. It had no weapon mounts, no escort vessel, no gravitational distortion around its shell. The beacon lights didn't flash, they pulsed, rhythmically. Binary timekeeping nested in atmospheric calm. From a distance, it resembled a listening post. Up close, it resembled an audit. This isn't a tactical insertion, said Protocol Engineer Vareth. There's no encryption. No firewall masking. They aren't hiding. This feed is public. Taveric said nothing. His gaze stayed fixed on the probe's data burst. The heads-up display inside the relay chamber flickered, realigning its focus as the transmission stabilized. A full-stream packet unfolded, slow and deliberate. Earth's formatting language rendered into Evanthi syntax through a translation architecture the Dominion had once co-designed during the Accord. There was no audio, only data. 6 worlds, listed cleanly down the screen's axis. Name, coordinates, mass, null. Atmosphere, non-detectable. Thermal flux, reverse signed. Each entry included geological slope history, population estimates, orbital anchors, and decay timestamps aligned with Earth's original environmental scaffolding systems. Taveric felt his breathing tighten. The numbers weren't dramatic. They were undeniable. These aren't warnings, whispered Vareth. These are gravestones. Taveric stepped back from the console, spine arched with tension. He tried to summon the protocols for denial, misreading, fabrication, any plausible technical counter. But every datum bore Dominion verification headers. Earth had sent the logs using Evanthi indexing. No intrusion, no falsification. Only information returned through channels they themselves helped build. The probe continued transmitting. New symbols appeared beneath the termination line of the death list. At first they resembled a nested checksum, Then the patterns shifted, folding into an indexed archive of colonial data. Taverick saw the folder structure and froze. Remaining systems index, non-redacted. Vareth leaned forward. That's not possible. That directory's only stored in Dominion Vault servers. Encrypted, layered, locked. Vale accessed it, Taverick muttered. Not through decryption. Through architecture. We let Earth host our first logistical subnet. We buried the registry into a formatting scaffold they authored. The screen populated with full colonial listings, names of every habitable world, outposts, terraforming projects, genetic nurseries, industrial moons. Each entry filed under its real name, with location accuracy down to 3 decimal places. There was no threat appended. There was no accompanying broadcast. Earth didn't issue ultimatums. They didn't speak at all. The probe hovered in complete stillness, anchored by solar drift and a payload of silence. But in that silence came a clarity the Dominion had never known how to fear. Not firepower, not military overreach, a revelation. Earth had mapped them not as targets, as conclusions. Across the relay's communication tiers, Dominion command nodes flickered with pulses of subspace static. Leaders and planetary defense networks demanded immediate threat profiles. But there was no assault vector, no triangulated fleet formation. The probe was alone. A single voice cut through the channel. Central Defense Strategist, Vale, commanding from the core governance ring of Vayar. Ishrin Sector confirms Earth audit probe. Can you intercept? Taverick's jaw stiffened. We can scramble the relay field and blind the beacon, but it's not transmitting to us, it's transmitting to everything. He gestured to the secondary monitor. The probe's data stream was accessible across dozens of communication ladders. Public access ports, civilian freight towers, even broadcast overlays tuned for agricultural timekeeping arrays. No sector was excluded, no caste filtered. Everyone could see it. The feed was shaped to be understood, not deciphered. Vale's voice returned, colder. What is Earth's endgame? Vark didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the lower corner of the screen, where a timestamp blinked, highlighted. +10 Terran days. Varret squinted. They signed the packet with a forward timestamp. Eric's eyes closed. They're not showing us what happened. He turned to face his team, throat tightening against a realization heavier than any battlefield outcome. They're showing us what they already decided will happen next. He moved to shut down the feed, hand poised above the disconnect panel. And then he paused. The station's artificial light cast his silhouette across the main display. A single Yuvanti, watching the shape of every future his people believed they had safeguarded. Do you understand what that list means? He asked quietly. Varath shook his head. They didn't broadcast proof of force, Taverick said. They broadcast certainty, the kind that doesn't ask permission, the kind that only arrives when someone has finished calculating consequences. As he spoke, the probe adjusted orientation, fractional, no-threat movement. The Dominion tracking array logged the shift without comment. The transmission didn't alter. It didn't have to. For the first time, the Ivanti weren't looking at an enemy. They were looking at the end of their own ledger. And someone else was holding the pen, sealed the High Council chamber. No observers, no minutes. Chancellor Iskaval's voice didn't rise. It deflated. The acoustic walls of the central dome responded by muting outside signals, pulling the chamber into an artificial silence meant for emergencies and war trials. Today, it served neither. There was no battlefield, no terms, only the presence of inevitability, seated like dust on every console. Delegate Voran, aged and weary, folded his robes over his knees, scanning the last incoming feed from Eshron Sector on the central laser plasma display. The image of Earth's unmanned probe still lingered on screen, unmoved. Still transmitting the index. Any motion from their side? Iskaval asked, not facing anyone directly. Not even signal drift, said Counselor Myrith. It's been transmitting the same dataset for 4 days, down to the millisecond. Earth hasn't added, redacted, or responded. Vorin didn't look up, which means they're finished with us. The table fell into a stillness more unbearable than any wartime shouting. Dominion leadership had convened countless times, over border disputes, genetic code rights, colony embargoes, but never in the absence of something to contest. Today there was nothing to argue, just coordinates, names, systems already dissolved, and a list still ticking. On the display's side rail, a smaller feed appeared. Civilian transmission logs from 14 sectors had dropped to 0 within minutes of one another. Communication networks shut down, not by hacking, but by internal Dominion directive. Planetary governors scrambled to silence outbound signals before their own populations discovered the final audit list from Earth. Vorin leaned toward the feed. They're muting their own people? It's containment, muttered Myrith. Better to retreat than let the panic fragment. Chancellor Iskaval swiped to a new feed. It displayed fleet mobilization across the border sectors, except the arrows trended inward. Dozens of command ships, formerly stationed along the defensive ridges of the Lafari Belt, had begun issuing return coordinates. Not to regroup, not to flank, they were abandoning their posts. Each message ended the same way. Auto-recall protocol initiated. Naval action suspended, awaiting full sector instruction. No battles, no engagements. Ships drifted away from confrontation like a body folding in on itself after breath leaves it. 3 of our military rings in the southern colonies have powered down, Myrith added, reading from a fresh side feed. Defense matrices order deconstruction of their own orbital guns. Autonomous command AI flagged Earth's data stream as override threshold. Vorin blinked hard, uncertain if he was more terrified by the retreat or by how silently it had begun. We gave them our logistics fabric, he said slowly, and now, every system we ever built on theirs is treating Earthstream as an authoritative correction. Chancellor Iskaval gripped the edge of the table. They didn't invade. They didn't negotiate. They let us forecast our own end and gave it 10 days of clarity. He gestured to the display. The countdown remained, static, unwavering, like a clock with no compassion. It didn't pulse. It didn't announce. It just waited. Across the Ivanti capital moons, agricultural transport fleets rerouted without order. Merchant vessels vanished from trade corridors overnight. Frontier moons deorbited their own construction platforms. Civilian traffic slowed to stillness. Even the youth guilds, the most zealous, most rhetorically conditioned against Terran influence, offered nothing. No protest, no declarations of loyalty. Earth's silence had reached them too. There was no force to defy, no face to rebel against, just a list. On the Council's inner wall, a new indicator blinked, a multi-sector protocol transmission routed to accord intelligence spheres. It carried no introduction, no diplomat's voice, only a signal classification known by few. Sector Abdication Pulse, Tier Omega. Chancellor Iskaval read it once, then nodded. Send it. No one protested. There was no ceremony, no mourning. The file was dispatched to accord high channels, informing every neutral system that the Dominion was withdrawing without demand, recompense, or conversation. Silence returned. It wasn't one born of reverence, but of recognition. Every voice that might have opposed the decision had already recalibrated to survival. Across the border, in Earth's orbital command ring, the probe feed reached its terminus. The stream continued to echo, but no analysis returned from Earth's own systems. The observation decks dimmed automatically. Inside Archive Station 4, Vex stood alone with his back to the readout. His posture didn't change. His hands rested loosely at his sides. The last transmission from the Dominion? A copy of their sector-wide capitulation pulse sat unopened in the buffer queue. He didn't access it. Eric, standing in the corridor, finally spoke. "They've sent full retraction orders. It's over." Vex didn't look away from the stars. "Nothing ends, it repositions. You're not going to reply?" "There's nothing left to answer." His voice was dry, not cruel, not triumphant, just finished. "Their systems are frozen, not by fear, but by math, and every calculation leads to a single conclusion." Eric waited, then asked, "What about the list?" Vex touched the panel. "Keep it running." 10 Terran days passed, and not a single additional world collapsed. Earth did not send more probes. No fleets emerged from slipspace. The null sigil remained silent. Across the Dominion's surviving colonies, whispers grew. Superstition, relief, unease. They spoke of an enemy who punished no longer, who didn't speak again, who didn't correct their remaining errors, who allowed them to keep what hadn't yet been touched. And across every Dominion channel, one question repeated, always unspoken. Was the list a promise or a mercy? "They're waiting for something we no longer intend to deliver." Dorian Vex said it quietly, without moving his eyes from the terminal. His fingers hovered over the analog keys, brass-tipped and unresponsive to touchscreens. There was no digital network here, no uplink, no buffer. Only weight behind action, that was the point. This station hadn't been connected to orbital systems since before the Accord's first charter. He could feel the stillness on his skin, more a temperature than a pressure. Outside, beyond the station's viewless hull, the debris shadow of Earth's upper orbital ring glided past in stately silence. The ships remained docked. No launch signatures, no propulsion fields. Just unlit bulkheads cradled in cradle lock. Commander Eric entered with slow steps, his boots clicking softly against the grated floor. The lights here didn't react to rank. They didn't track movement. They stayed dim by design. It's been 10 days. The probe hasn't shifted its telemetry pattern. Dominion streams have gone silent. Our surveillance archives received 22 message pings, all identical. Vex didn't look up. Retraction notices? Not quite. Inquiries. Tone suggests they're trying to confirm if the list is still active. "They don't understand that we never scheduled what comes next," Vex said, brushing dust from the edge of the console. "They're staring at a ledger, afraid the silence is part of the sentence." Eric folded his arms. "And isn't it?" Vex finally turned, expression unreadable. It was always about what they wouldn't be told. Behind him, the analog terminal completed a cycle. The indicator light switched from amber to green, confirmation that the final layer of Sable Architect had burned through. Across Earth's automated backend, the subroutines began dissolving their own code. Environmental listeners shut down. Internal watchers purged memory logs. Every embedded scaffolding marker across the Dominion stopped transmitting. No archive recorded their expiration. They vanished as quietly as they had activated. "What happens if they try to reverse engineer what happened?" Eric asked, voice low. "They'll find nothing to extract," Vex answered. "No path to emulate. The routines were nested within themselves. Once complete, they consumed their own instruction sets. Even our core command servers never held copies." Eric frowned. "That wasn't in the original protocol." "It was added," Vex said. "The day I saw what they did to Corinth." The lights above flickered, not an error but by preset interval, marking the transition into station's final record window. The system was old enough that it still used time flags, not centralized clocks. Vex pulled open the side drawer of the console. Inside rested a single panel of etched ceramic, its surface matte, edges lined with redundant imprint nodules for physical inscription. A stylus lay beside it, untouched. He picked it up. No keyboard, no feed, no voice commands, just a surface to mark. He wrote slowly, deliberately, pausing once to adjust the angle of his hand. The stylus scratched softly as it passed over the ceramic. All terms enforced, no remainder. When he finished, he placed the tablet into the archive bay beneath the terminal. The hatch closed with a soft hiss, mechanical, not powered. It locked on contact. That chamber would be sealed forever. The console would never open it again. No technician would be granted clearance. No command string would reach that chamber from Earth's servers. Vex stepped back. That was the final entry? Eric asked. There will be no others. He exhaled as if shedding armor. The myth begins now. Outside in the orbital quiet, Earth's fleets remained in place. Communications traffic followed standard logistics. Civilian stations buzzed with routine cargo manifests. Border patrols maintained passive watch cycles. No readiness drills were triggered. No memorials were held. The Accord received no victory declaration. In the Dominion's inner worlds, something stranger began. Stillness. Governors issued no new construction mandates. Border stations halted expansion proposals. Commerce fell to maintenance-level efficiency. No one celebrated survival. The list hadn't changed. It frightened them more than collapse. Eric glanced at the black window set high in the station wall. You think they'll believe it was always meant to stop there? No, Vex said. That's why it worked. He walked past the central interface and stopped beside the wall rack where his coat still hung, creased at the shoulder seam from disuse. He didn't put it on. He stood beside it, letting his thoughts catch up to his body. They needed to believe we had more, he added, but they needed it to remain unspoken. What we didn't do was louder than anything we could have said. And you? Eric asked. Vex didn't move. I designed the tools to vanish. It's only right I follow. He pressed his palm against the exit seal. The corridor opened to the docking hall, faint light sliding across the floor. Eric didn't follow. Vex didn't look back. He left the room in silence, taking nothing with him. The door closed behind him. The console's indicator faded to dark. And the Earth, having made no demands, offered no reply. You asked who controls the stars. We showed you who calibrates the soil beneath them. The voice belonged to Director Halan Trell of the Conqueror's Military Stratification Bureau, addressing 12 seated commanders inside the sealed operations vault beneath Direx's station. They didn't speak. They didn't interrupt. The briefing file, locked to in-room clearance, was time-stamped 1 hour after the Dominion's final sector-wide withdrawal. No new attacks had occurred. No new messages had followed, but the map had changed. Behind Trell, the heads-up display ran silent footage, gravitational field distortions recorded from the edge of the Jalvan Ridge. Not simulation, not animated overlay. Real orbital readings of a planetary crust folding into kinetic suspension. The tectonic plates had buckled without sound, lifting like sheets caught in a crosscurrent. Water boiled upward, not from heat, but from dissonance. They didn't deploy fleets, Trout continued. They didn't issue demands, and yet 12 sovereign colonies collapsed into mathematical surrender. The general seated along the far side spoke quietly, his voice slow, controlled. We used to plan for mass displacement through orbital burn. Now we have to plan for redefinition of constants. Trell nodded. Because they made one thing clear. You don't need weapons when your enemy is holding the wrong map. One of the tacticians gestured toward the secondary feed. What exactly is the strategic term being proposed? Trell turned toward the wall, keyed the new file name, and stepped back. The phrase appeared across the center of the screen in hard white. If Earth archives your coordinates, move. It was not a phrase born from propaganda. It had never been spoken by Terran officials. It had originated in Dominion refugee councils, muttered in low tones by governors who could no longer explain the tides to their people. The doctrine spread, not as fear, but as recalibration. Across neutral space, engineers paused deployments of foreign Terra integrators. Shared resource protocols were re-examined. Calibration nodes embedded by Terran contractors over previous decades were now questioned, not for what they were doing, but for what they might silently know. At the Interstellar Forum of Independent Systems, research guilds submitted formal papers titled Epistemological Sovereignty in Multi-Species Treaties and Strategic Vulnerability Through Constant Inheritance. Earth was cited only in footnotes, but every peer reviewer understood the subject. Military academies shifted curricula. Engineers argued over environmental baselines. Not a single copy of the Sable Architect routines had been found, not even within Earth's own digital skeleton. Across universities, defense labs, and political consortiums, the same conclusion took root. Earth had rewritten the rules of deterrence. They had turned data fidelity into a battlefield. They had introduced a new equation, one where power wasn't applied, it was revealed. And the weapon had no name. Far from the orbiting vaults, beyond the relay rings and protected spheres, Dorian Vex sat alone at the outermost post of Earth's polar research tier. The observatory dome was built into ice older than human civilization itself, resting where magnetic storms erased communication trails. The chair beneath him was carved from inert composite, wrapped in insulation cloth, hand-worn from years of private use. His gloves sat unused on the bench beside him. The stars above were clear, so unusually still that no satellites crossed them. No cargo markers blinked. No relay pulses flashed. Not tonight. The silence was different here. Not tactical, not symbolic, just cold enough to stay honest. His breath fogged as he sipped from a thermos that had long since lost its factory seal. He wasn't here for updates. He hadn't requested feeds. He already knew the answers. No planetary collapses had followed, no retaliation had emerged, the list remained static. Earth had not erased the rest. They had simply shown what they could, and that had been enough. A small figure approached from behind, the station courier, one of only 3 personnel allowed on site. The boy couldn't have been older than 20, barely taller than the rail. He didn't speak at first, just extended a folded report with shaking fingers. "Sir, they want to know if we'll be issuing a formal conclusion." Vex took the envelope. He didn't open it. "They want us to state the terms," the boy added, more hesitant now. Vex set the envelope aside, placing it on the ledge near a row of frost-bitten instruments. Then he pointed toward the stars. "Do you know what those are?" The boy nodded. "Cataloged systems, settled sectors, transit zones." "No," Vex said. "They're predictions, every single one. We only call them fixed because we trust the numbers behind their movements. But nothing in the sky is still, not truly. Everything moves." The boy hesitated, not sure if it was a correction or a lesson. "Earth never needed to conquer them," Vex said, eyes never leaving the dark. "We just needed them to realize we were watching. And we never needed to fire, because the map they used to resist us, we helped write it." A pause settled, not from discomfort but from understanding. "I thought they broke the treaty," the boy said. Vex blinked once. "They didn't break our trust," he replied. He stood slowly, stretching his back, the muscles tightening from cold. "They erased their own." He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. And in that moment, under a sky stitched with coordinates once shared and now unspoken, Dorian Vex stepped back into the observatory, closed the hatch, and left the rest of the galaxy to wonder what else had already been archived. What would you have done if Earth gave you the constants, then started watching? Was it justice or something colder? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was the Avanti collapse earned or engineered? Hit subscribe for more thrilling HFY stories.